Well, welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. My guest for this episode is Guy Kawasaki, who is the Chief Evangelist for Canva and former Chief Evangelist for Apple. He has authored over a dozen best-selling books, and his latest one is Think Remarkable, 9 Paths to Transform Your Life and Make a Difference. In this episode, I continue my conversation with him as we unpack the critical skills and mindsets you need to have if you want to become remarkable. Guy shares poignant stories and valuable insights from his experiences, along with lessons from other remarkable people such as Julia Cameron, Angela Duckworth, Sal Khan, and Stacey Abrams, as well as lessons he's learned from his parents. Enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. So the leading edge of remarkableness is to jump curves and to create the tide. But you say you can also create and achieve remarkableness by riding a rising tide and being a fast second.
Yes. You could make the case that Microsoft is the greatest proof of this, right? Well, depending on how you want to look at Apple, you could say this is about Apple too, but the pioneer graphical user interface was Xerox PARC. Let's just be honest. Now, Steve Jobs and crew went to Xerox PARC and they figured out what they liked and what to copy, which is a skill in and of itself. You can break into somebody's house and steal the pillows and the dirty laundry, or you can steal the money in the safe and the jewelry in the safe. So I think that it takes some taste to know what to copy, but that's an important step, and it can come several different ways. So one way is to work backwards from the customer. So instead of what you like to do and have been doing, you ask yourself, well, what do the customers want? Not what do I want? And I think Kodak is a negative example, right? So they wanted to make film and they wanted to make prints, but customers wanted to preserve their memories. And so the irony is that Kodak invented digital photography, but they didn't embrace it because they were in the film and chemicals business. But if they had stepped back and said, so why are people buying our film with chemicals? They're buying it because they want to preserve memories. So Kodak was in the memory preservation business, not the chemicals business. So that's an example of working forward, not working back. You could make the same case about Blockbuster, that Blockbuster thought, we're brick and mortar. People get in their cars, come to our stores, look at DVDs on the shelf, rent them, get back in their cars, go home, watch them, get back in the cars, bring them back, get more DVDs. So we're in the retail brick and mortar DVD rental. Well, truly, Blockbuster is in the home movie business, right? Convenience and watch anything you want, whenever you want. So you would have thought, oh my God, right now we're shipping DVDs, but man, it would be much better if we stream. And that's why there's Netflix today and not Blockbuster. So that's one way, working backwards. Another way is to not only go and see your customer, but go and be your customer. And the example I cite is that Martin Lindstrom, a friend of mine, he was retained by a pharmaceutical company to help them understand their customer better. So what he did is, instead of doing a survey, he just took them in a room and he made them breathe through straws, which is not a fun experience. And then at the end of the act, he told them, you want to understand more about your customers. That's what it's like to have asthma. So now you were asthmatic for the last 10 minutes. That's what it's like. Now do you feel closer to your customer? And a third way, kind of contrary to the first two, which is build the product or service that you want to use. So Steve Wozniak, he was not driven by some big time consulting report about the potential for personal computers. He built the Apple I because he wanted a small, cheap, easy to use personal computer. He was building for himself. He was being the customer.
Well, those are great examples and insights. Remarkable people also, they don't usually start with grandiose plans, crushing or dominating the universe. They start with small and simple questions.
Yeah, they do. And if you look at the great companies, you think, oh man, Stephen Watt, they probably had this great vision that they're going to have personal computers, and then they're going to have music players, and then they're going to have pads, and then they're going to have retail stores, and they're going to have Genius bars, and they're also going to have an app store so people can buy apps online. I hate to tell you, but Steve Wozniak just wanted to make enough motherboards to sell at the homebrew computing company, club. I mean, it wasn't grandiose. So, just ask simple questions like, is there a better way? Or isn't this interesting, this odd thing we noticed? It's those kind of questions. It's not, how do I develop a multi-trillion-dollar company that achieves worldwide domination?
Well, one example you give in the book, which I love, is Edwin Land's daughter asked him why she had to wait to see photographs that he had taken, and Land went on to found Polaroid, the instant camera company. So those simple questions can lead to remarkable transformations, given the time and the demand by the consumers.
If Edward Land was still alive and his daughter said, well, Daddy, I mean, how do I send this Polaroid photo to my friend across the country? Maybe he would have made an iPhone camera, right? I mean,
You never know.
yeah, yeah, because it takes so long, Daddy, to put the Polaroids in an envelope and get it across the country. There must be a better way.
Exactly. Well, during the second phase too, when you're persevering, when you have your aspiration, but you're persevering, you always have that internal critic, right? That's kind of telling you, yeah, you aren't good enough, you aren't going to make it. And what you found, and one of your favorite guests too, I think she's been on the podcast many times, is Julia Cameron, saying that you have to identify that, and she identifies her inner critic as Nigel. Give it a name.
Yeah, yeah. Julia Cameron has this fictitious naysayer in her life that she has named Nigel. And, Nigel is the one saying that your book isn't good enough, your idea isn't good enough. And what she has done is she just packaged Nigel into a little person and just regularly has a conversation with Nigel and then tells Nigel where to go, basically.
How about when remarkable people, you say, don't hear no? And I found that fascinating. They hear not now, not yet, or yes, if.
Yes, I mean, it's part of the grit mentality that, if you think you're going to embrace the growth mentality, you're immediately going to be good. You're going to create a great product or service, and then the world is going to beat its path to your door. It's time you wake up from that dream, because that ain't how it's going to happen. So people are going to tell you, no, or no, you can't even come see me. No, I don't want to order anything. No, I don't want to pay. I mean, you cannot hear no. You have to hear, like you said, not yet, or yes, but if you do this, I'll give you a yes. That's the kind of attitude you have to have.
And Melanie Perkins did that too, right? 299 rejections you mentioned before the one said yes. And now Canva, multi-billion-dollar company, has disrupted the whole graphic design market. And it wouldn't be so if she didn't have the grit, right? If she just said, well, I guess there's no demand for this and I should just stop.
Yeah. I cannot honestly tell you that if I were turned down 299 times, I would have kept going. But thank you, God, that she did.
Well, let's move to stage 3, and that's about grace, uplifting and inspiring. So talk to me a little bit, give me an overview of this stage.
Yeah. So grace is when you figure out, oh my God, yes, I have had the growth mindset. Yes, I've been gritty, but now that I'm successful, I can look back and say, there was this 6th grade teacher that told my parents to put me into a school that got me into Stanford. There was this boss who encouraged me to learn how to sell jewelry. There was this general counsel at Apple that advised me on how to play my Apple career. There were acts of just pure dumb shit luck that happened. There were people who opened the door for me. There were, coaches and teachers and mentors all the way along. And it's not all about me. I'm not here because I am just singularly remarkable. There's a lot of things that have to fall into place. And I think when you come to that realization that it's not just that you're amazing, it's other people helped you, you figure out, maybe I should pay back the system. Maybe just for the karmic scoreboard, I should help others. And that's the grace mindset.
Wonderful. And really to count your blessings, because you mentioned also that everyone that you interviewed counted their blessings, even when their blessings were few and their difficulties were numerous.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, a lot of it is just relativity, right? That, and listen, this is one of those things that's easier said than done. So I am deaf, believe it or not. You probably didn't even notice that because I have a cochlear implant. But if someone said, okay, so being deaf, that's probably not conducive to being a podcaster. I mean, you wouldn't say, oh, you're deaf. I got the perfect career for you, podcasting. Um, but so somebody people would say, like, that's so bad, that's so horrible. How do you deal with being deaf? But then I interviewed in my podcast people who got diagnosed with ALS, and they're 10 years with this diagnosis. Most people die 2 years after diagnosis. I have an artist who was sentenced at 16 to 40 years in prison for a murder. He got out after 22 years, and now he's a successful artist. I have a person in the podcast that grew up in the projects of Brooklyn, and both his parents were crack addicts, and so you look at that and you say, well, my parents weren't crack addicts, and like I never went to prison, and Beethoven wrote the fifth when he was deaf. I mean, and I don't have ALS. I don't have an incurable lethal disease. So what am I complaining about?
Exactly. It's if someone once told me if we magnified our blessings as much as we magnified our problems, the world would be a better place.
No kidding. Yeah.
And many of the people that you've interviewed and spoken with, they prioritize helping others over their own glory. That's how they define success in the end. Sal Khan, famous creator of Khan Academy, he cares about how many kids he's helping to educate around the world. He's not looking at wealth, fortune, or fame, but really impacting lives.
Yeah, I mean, he's a particularly good example because if you think of all the people that his installed base is quite large, but clearly he's not doing it for the money. He has to fundraise and all this, but at the end of the day, when you go and meet your maker and your maker asks you, so what have you done with your life? If you can say you help educate tens of millions of people, I think you're pretty much guaranteed to spend eternity in a good place, as opposed to, let's say, someone who runs a hedge fund or, private equity fund. What have you done? Well, I made $50 billion and I built a building at Stanford and a building at Harvard. And, I made sure that Harvard presidents don't have plagiarism in their past. That's what I did. I think Sal Khan is ahead of that.
Absolutely. So changing how you keep score is so critical. It's, look at fulfillment, look at your relationships. I don't think many people really measure success by the quality of their relationships, but at the end of their life, I've interviewed enough people to know that's what really matters. The quality of your relationships is paramount when you get closer to the end and you realize all that material success really means nothing. Did I leave a lasting impact and legacy with those that I love?
I hope so. I mean, that's my theory too. I guess we'll find, well, I don't think we'll find out too soon. Hopefully not. But listen, when I die, I want people to say I helped them make a difference. That's what I wanted to say. Not that I created the largest hedge fund in the history of Wall Street.
And too many people, I love this terminology, I've never heard this before, but they punch down, they belittle, they criticize, they attack people who have less power, money, or social standing, when in reality, you should be punching up.
I don't know where you are politically, but one of the great examples of this is Donald Trump, because a few years ago, he was making fun of the New York Times, a reporter that has a nervous system disease that makes him shake, like that. And so Donald Trump was giving a speech and he was impersonating his shaking and all that. Like, so you're telling me this billionaire running for president is trying to make fun of a New York Times reporter with a neurological disease? I mean, that's punching down, right? I mean, that's like, you don't have to be a billionaire and president to do this. I mean, you just go to the airport and you see people yelling at the clerk checking people in, or you see people treating stewards and stewardesses or flight attendants poorly. Like they're just trying to like flex and punch down. And you know what? That's just bullshit.
I'm with you on that. And we need more unity, less division in this country and in this world. And I love how you mentioned too that ask how questions, which creates an invitation to want to know their story instead of why questions, which turns in making them a little bit more defensive, right? Well, why do you believe this versus how can I understand where you're coming from?
Yeah. So I learned this from someone who used to run the Fuller Seminary. Fuller Seminary is in Pasadena, California. And it's basically, I would say, and I mean this in a positive way because it can be taken negatively too. It's like the Harvard Business School of theology. And anyway, I got into this podcast interview and I said, like, I don't understand evangelical Christians, and they say they're Christians, but they want to like take away the rights. They want to, close borders. They want guns. They want, all like, how does that fit in with Christianity? And he said, Guy, when you encounter someone like that, instead of asking them what they believe or why they believe, you should ask them, how did they come to that belief? Because by asking them how they came to that belief, you would understand where they're coming from and perhaps be less judgmental. So I give you an example. So let's say you meet someone and they say, vaccinations cause death, so I'm never going to get vaccinated, and you say, like, what do you believe? And he said, oh, vaccination causes autism and death. Like, why do you believe that? Oh, I saw it on Fox. Well, those two things, it's not going to lead to a better relationship with that person. So if you ask them how you came to that belief, maybe they'll tell you, well, my granddaddy was in the army and, he was involuntarily enlisted in this experiment where people were giving vaccines to see what would happen, and he died from his vaccine. So ever since then, I don't trust vaccines. When you hear that story, you say, aha, I get it. I understand why you might not trust vaccines.
How about for ignoring? Because a lot of people get offended by way too much. And ignoring can be a superpower, like you mentioned. And the first piece is don't take things personally all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine line. If you don't take things personally and don't get offended, you might lead a happier life. You might be a more pleasant person, which will lead to more pleasant and more happy life. But don't get me wrong. I mean, there are sometimes you should take offense and you should speak up for yourself. But I guess my father taught me that don't go through life looking for problems. Enough problems will find you. You don't need to go and look for problems. And I truly do believe that dealing with problems and making problems out of things takes much more energy than just ignoring something, right? I mean, when you watch these YouTube videos and you see somebody like honking their horn and chasing down somebody and jumping out of a car or a truck, and like you see, oh yeah, like now you're on a YouTube video, now you got arrested for assault and battery. I mean, wouldn't it have just been easier if you just said, well, what can I do? I mean, just ignore that shit.
Yeah, and you have a great example in the book where your father kind of reminded you of that lesson to take the higher road when someone assumed you could do their lawn, and you were offended by that, and you wanted to, possibly put them in their place, and your father gave you an alternative route to take.
Yes, he did. So the story here is that I was at our house on Union Street in San Francisco, right where Union Street goes into the Presidio, which, if you're familiar with San Francisco, is a very nice part of town. I was out in front cutting a bougainvillea bush, and this older white woman comes up to me and says, oh, do you do lawns too? And I said, oh, I'm Japanese American, so you think I'm the yard man, right? And I was ready to rock and roll. And then 2 weeks later, my father comes and visits me. So I'm third generation. He's second generation. He served in the army, the U.S. Army, not the Japanese Army. So anyway, so I figure, oh man, he's going to go off when I tell him this story. My son who He went to Stanford. He has an MBA from UCLA, worked for Apple, is the author of books, blah, blah, blah. How dare this woman think my son is a yard man? But to my utter amazement, he says, son, on Union Street in San Francisco, a Japanese man cutting a hedge in the front of a house most likely is the yard man. So, get over it. Don't look for trouble. Maybe she just wanted to know if you did lawns. It wasn't a racial thing. And that's kind of the day I learned, like not worth getting aggravated. Give her the benefit of the doubt. And, life is too short.
Absolutely. Give people the benefit of the doubt. It's so important to just reiterate, and don't worry about something you cannot do anything about. So many people have anxiety and worry about the things they can't control in their life.
What I should have done is ask her, well, how much are you willing to pay to have the lawn done? Because, you never know.
Well, your parents gave you lots of lessons. You share a few in the book. 1, show some class. 2, don't be a tight ass. And 3, leave everywhere cleaner than where you found it. So that's great advice from your parents. And I'm sure they gave you many more lessons as well.
Yeah, well, we are the products of our parents. And I had 2 great parents. What can I say? I hope I'm as good a parent as my parents were for me.
Don't try to teach people a lesson. I see that a lot these days, where people are trying to teach a lesson and make it a kind of a educational point, because still waters run deep.
And by teaching a lesson, I mean, I'm referring more to the kind of things you see on YouTube or TikTok, where someone's going to teach the person a lesson for cutting me off in traffic, right? Or we're talking about that kind of thing. Now, if a teacher or a coach or a mentor wants to teach you a lesson, that's a completely different discussion. We're talking about this punitive, I got to get my respect, right? You got to respect me. That's bullshit.
So another thing that I liked about the book is just the process and just a reminder of how to apologize. Many people aren't good at this.
I interviewed a professor, and she ran a class for foreign students, and she became an expert in apology. So the gist of how to apologize is, first of all, you have got to say, I am sorry, right? Those 3 words need to pass through your lips. Not, I didn't intend to, it was an accident. Oh, did I offend you? Did I somehow hurt you? You got to say, I am sorry. And I think that's about 90% of it. And not offer an excuse, and to take responsibility that it wasn't my intention. Well, doesn't matter what your intention was. If you hurt the person, you hurt the person. It wasn't my intention to run you over. Sorry. You got to say, I am sorry for running you over.
Absolutely. Before we end, love to go through kind of toward the end of the book, you give Stacey's creed, and it really encapsulates the 3 parts of the book. Maybe you can give more insight and information about her and how really her story kind of embodies these 3 stages of growth to be a remarkable person.
Yeah, I mean, Stacey Abrams was, I interviewed her at my house, and she basically, and I wish I could tell you I was so sly as I set her up to do this, but it had nothing to do with it. She basically said, growth, grit, and grace. She said, you got to keep learning. You got to be willing to pay the price. And then you got to be a good person. And that's the secret to being remarkable in life. And I said, oh, Stacey, that is just perfect. I'm going to close the book with you.
I love it. And you have top 10 tips for being remarkable. We've covered many of those. I just want to go over 1 or 2 more that we didn't yet have time to cover. 1 is trust the dots, which I think is important to know, because the only way you're going to know how the dots connect is by looking backwards, right? There's no really way to predict it moving forward.
Yeah, this is something I picked up from Steve Jobs' Stanford commencement address. And as I think about it, it's so true that, don't get me wrong, there's a place for planning and, figuring out what you want to do. But at the end of the day, I mean, you're going to look back and you think, God, when I was quitting law school, I thought it was the end of the world. But as I look back now, I said, that was the best thing I ever did. And that's not just rationalization. I truly do believe that. So you got to, at some point, you got to say, like, this setback, I just got to trust that, it's going to work out, but there's an advantage to, I don't know, not getting into Harvard Business School or, something like that. And you don't get into Harvard Business School, so you go to a night program and then you meet the co-founder of your company. And, the next thing you know, you're like the next Google. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? But if you go to Harvard Business School, you're just going to meet people from McKinsey and Goldman Sachs anyway. So, well.
Well, and many people that want to be remarkable, I think two good things to note is make yourself valuable and unique. That's what you can do to help yourself along that path. Many people don't look at it in those terms or really use those two words to describe that journey.
I kind of believe that you can reduce everything in life to a 2x2 matrix. So, the vertical axis, there's like valuable, not valuable. And then on the horizontal axis, there's like unique and not unique. And so what you want to do is you want to have like something of value and it's unique, because if it's valuable but not unique, you have to compete on price. And if it's not valuable and not unique, well, you're just a loser. And if it's not valuable but it is unique, you're also a loser. I mean, you got to make something valuable. So a very good example, I think, of this is the iPod when it first came out. It was truly unique and valuable. It was the only device with an interface that a human could use. It's the only way to get a wide selection of songs very easily and 99 cents, inexpensively and legally. So there's nothing else like it. And the ability to carry a lot of songs on a device that you could use legally and inexpensively, that made it unique and valuable, and that's why iPod was successful.
And really, getting back to what we talked about initially is make the world a better place. The remarkable people, they don't go after money, fame, or fortune, or followers. That's not the priority. They're wanting to make the world a better place and impact it in some positive manner.
Yeah, and you know what? If you make the world a better place and impact it in a positive manner, you might be surprised that the money and followers and influence will follow, but you didn't do it for that. You did it to make the world a better place.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Guy. I'd like to end every podcast with just a call to action to our listeners. What's one thing they can do now to become more remarkable or start going down that path?
Well, I think that they can just embrace the growth mindset, and I encourage them to try new things, do new things, like try new hobbies, try new sports, try new functions. I mean, in particular right now, I would say if you're reticent or if you're lagging, you got to try artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is the humongous change in society. So, have the growth mindset and give ChatGPT and etc. a chance. See what you can do with it.
Thank you so much, Guy. Remind my listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
I'm going to send you a link for a Canva course about how to be remarkable in case, there it goes. In case people don't have access to the book or, don't want to spend the money on the book, I still want you to be remarkable. So that's a free Canva course about how to be remarkable.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.